So we're going to get started here in a minute. I just wanted to do some house. We're going to get started here in a minute. I just wanted to do some house notes that I don't think my volume's coming through. Is it? It's kind of low. It's good. So Susan is going to present. I'm going to do the introduction, and then just a couple things. When the program starts, Susan will have a PowerPoint. But when it's time for Q&A, we have one microphone, which is right here. So please, instead of shouting out your question, please go to the microphone because we are live streaming it. We want to record it, and that would be beneficial for all. And then after the talk, Susan will sit here and sign her new book, and we'll start a line over here. Okay. Susan's told me there are a lot of her friends here today. Welcome. I'm Bob Attardi. I'm the director of programs here, and we do classes and trips, and we thank you for your support of the bookstore. We are a literary and cultural hub for the community and appreciate your support of our author talks and programs that bring together us, you, to share ideas, stories, and experiences. I am truly honored to introduce our author today. Susan Rubin Suleiman is a remarkable woman. I've had the good fortune to present Susan's class on the 2022 Nobel Prize in Literature author Annie Arnaud for the bookstore's programs department. She contacted me last October and said she herself was an author living locally here in Maryland, a PMP member, a Harvard professor of modern French literature, and that I should Google her. Excitedly, I did. Susan Rubin Suleiman is the C. Douglas Dillon Research Professor of the Civilization of France and Professor of Comparative Literature Emerita at Harvard University. Susan's a noted scholar and has won many honors, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. In 2018, she was decorated with France's highest honor, the Légion d'honneur. The author of more than 100 articles on contemporary literature and culture published in the U.S. and abroad, Susan's many books include The Nemirovsky Question, about the Russian-French novelist Irina Nemirovsky, and issues of Jewish identity in 20th century France. Other books include The Crisis of Memory in the Second World War, Subversive Intent, Gender, Politics, and the Avant-Garde. She's written a lot, and she, again, I'll keep saying this, a remarkable life. Her previous autobiographical memoir, Budapest Diary, In Search of the Mother Book, is a memoir about Hungary. And that leads us to today's sequel. Today we celebrate the release of Susan's new memoir, Daughter of History, Traces of an Immigrant Girlhood, published by Stanford University Press. She was born in Budapest, Hungary, and immigrated to the U.S. as a child with her parents. They escaped Hungary in 1949, Jewish survivors of the Nazi occupation. Her parents immigrated to Chicago by way of Vienna, Paris, Haiti, and New York. I have to tell this, Susan. Early in her academic life, she studied chemistry, and she had a mentor at Barnard, and that person influenced her to study literature. And one book she said that she never got to read was Milton's Paradise Lost. The bookstore might be able to help you with a class on that. So, as the reader looks at the chapters in the book, we see titles, for example, a silver pin, a traveling chess set, a recording of Heifetz playing Beethoven's Violin Concerto, that we come to realize are links to an object and a memory that tell the story of her early life as a Holocaust refugee and American immigrant. In this coming-of-age story, this is her publicist says, that probes the intergenerational complexities of immigrant families and the inevitability of loss, Susan looks to her own life as an example of how historical world events can shape our private lives. Please join me in welcome our distinguished author, Susan Rubin Suleiman.
Thank you, Bob. That was a really marvelous introduction. And I did have a wonderful time teaching that course on Yale. No, just two sessions, but it was really fun. I'm just thrilled to see so many familiar faces here and also unfamiliar faces. That may be even more thrilling. I only moved to Washington about just 4 years ago, barely 4 years ago, and yet I already feel that it's kind of my home. It has become a home, and I'm very pleased that I have such dear friends who are new that I just met, and also a bunch of old friends who have lived here for a while. So I'm really, really thrilled. About the book. A dear friend who is an experienced journalist who happens to be sitting here, but never mind, told me the other day that the question that I should try to answer in talking about this book is, what should readers take away from it? What is it trying to convey? And this is not the same as, what is this book about, he insisted. That question can be answered fairly quickly. It's about how my Orthodox Jewish family had the good fortune to survive the Holocaust in Budapest and eventually find refuge in the United States. It's about how we escaped from communist Hungary when I was 10 years old, about our stopovers in Vienna and Paris and Port-au-Prince, Haiti, which was less scary at that time than it is now, about our arrival in America, about my learning to speak English without an accent, about my ambition to be an American teenager just like the others, about my success in realizing that ambition, and later in creating an American life, marriage, children, divorce, becoming a Harvard professor, as my mother never tired of boasting to her friends. Yes, the book is about all that, and also about childhood trauma and resilience, about what remains when many things are lost. But the more difficult question, what does it all mean, and what can it mean to you, my potential or actual readers, will take a bit longer to explore. So I'll leave it open for now and start at the beginning. I should say that this book was written almost entirely during the pandemic, at a time when there seemed to be nowhere else to go but inward. So starting at the beginning, more or less, which way? Help. Just trying to get to the first slide. Nope. First. Is there? There should be. Sorry. This is one of the. There should be one before that. Yeah. That's it. That's the one. Okay. Oh, so am I going to be able to find them in order? Oh, all right, never mind. Thank you. I'll call on you. So this, oh, no, you know what? I am totally wrong. I don't know why I'm thinking, it's the beginning for me, but I wanted to start way before that. Okay, let's go further. Sorry. Could you help? Where are you? Okay, I don't know why I was completely wrong. I want to start with two photos. Sorry, this will take 1 second, but it'll be okay. No, before that. Okay. Before. That's it. Oh, so it was right. I'm sorry. I didn't have coffee. Well, these are two photos that were taken of me in February or January, maybe 1944, in a fancy photography studio in Budapest. And the name of it is down at the right, and it's the Album of Smiles, which is, when you think about it, that in January or February of 1944, people were smiling. But these were among a jumble of old photos that my sister and I found in a drawer after our mother died. She had carried them around since August 1949 when we escaped from Hungary. And at that point, there were just three of us, my parents and I. My sister Judy was born later. I can imagine my mother on that summer day in 1949. She has to pack a suitcase, not too big, not too heavy. We are about to set out on foot across the border. So what do you take with you on such an occasion? A few pieces of jewelry, a warm clothing, it's August, but one never knows, and of course some family photos. These days, many of them are creased or crumbled, noticeably the worse for wear, but they are among my prized possessions, along with a silver pin that my mother often wore in Budapest, and a traveling chess set that my father bought when he knew that we'd be leaving Hungary. My mother sent the first of these photos, that one there, to her sister, who was hiding somewhere in France, and dated the message February 14th, 1944. And the second one she sent, undated, but I assume around the same time, to her older brother, Ijo, to the address of a forced labor camp. I know this because these photos are in the form of postcards. And the back, when you turn it around, is revelatory. Here's the back of the one to Ijo. I hope it, this is the one, the back of the one to Ijo, which shows me, let's just go back for 1 second, it's this one. I'm standing there, you know, like a little housewife in front of a stove. They had all kinds of props in the photography studios. And the back of that one, it has his name on it. And the name of, sorry, the back of this card is really, really interesting, because on the one hand, there's the message which says, "With much love to my dear uncle from Zsuzsika." That's my name in Hungarian, a sort of a pet name in Hungarian. And the sort of revealing thing over there, Zirtz, is the name of a place where there was a camp. But this I had no idea. I only found this out when I began to really investigate this whole thing and to try to figure out, what are these photographs? What was this camp? What was he doing there? There is a postage stamp, as you can see, showing that it was mailed. And right next to it, there is also, right next to the message, there's an official stamp. Right next to the message, which says "much love," there's an official stamp, a kind of a rectangular thing, which says in Hungarian "ellenőrizve," which means supervised or verified. So somebody, a censor or a supervisor, had to look over the card before it could be delivered. It took me a while and some research to figure out what this was all about. In 1940, the Hungarian army began conscripting Jewish men aged 18 to 65 into forced labor service, and my mother's two brothers were among them. At first, the conscripts were relatively well treated, if one can say that about civilians who are forced to work long hours clearing woods and carrying rocks. They were lawyers and doctors, and I'm not used to that. Later, it got much worse. In the winter of 1943, the Hungarian army was routed by the advancing Soviet troops in Ukraine at the River Don. Many thousands of regular Hungarian army troops were killed. And that battle is considered a national tragedy in Hungary. But the Jewish conscripts fared even worse, if that's possible. Seriously deprived of clothes and shoes and food, they were set to clearing minefields ahead of the regular troops. So if they were not blown up, they starved or froze to death. My uncle Ijo, who received this postcard, died in forced labor, although we never knew exactly where or when. His brother, who was in a different unit, had lost track of him early on. Was he dead by the time he received this postcard? this by the time the postcard arrived, or did he receive it and smile at the absurd pose of his little niece standing by a toy stove? Either way, how did the picture get back to my mother? I've come up with a few scenarios to explain that fact, but nothing quite fits. I can puzzle over every detail of this card and discover all this interesting information, like the town of Zirz is in northwestern Hungary, not far from the birthplace of Hungary's first Catholic king, Saint Stephen. I think it's ironic to put a forced labor camp in such a town. But there are some facts that I will never be able to explain, no matter how much I try. And that's one of the things that I learned in writing this book. A life that you look back on is not like a tightly plotted novel where everything is in place, but like a set of snapshots held together by personal memory or by family stories with a lot of holes in them. And just to finish the story of my uncle Ijo, I hope I'm going the right way. This is the ID photograph of Ijo when he was enrolled in forced labor. He was 38 years old at the time. I have no real memories of this man, but it's paradoxical because I recognize him on all the photos where he appears. I think I love his owlish little glasses that look very modern. Now here's another question that I have no answer to. What was my mother thinking, and what did she know when she took me to that fancy photography studio and had pictures of me made in February 1944? Did she know about what was happening to Jews in Poland, or what had already happened to Jews in Poland, or Holland, or France? Clearly, she could not know that almost exactly 1 month after that photo session, on March 19, 1944, the German army would invade Hungary. Hungary was actually technically an ally of Germany. That's why the Germans did not invade before 44. But the leader of the Hungarian government, Horthy, was thinking of stopping his alliance. So when Hitler found that out, he decided he would invade, and also he would finally get his hands on the Hungarian Jews, because there were about 600,000 Jews living in the borders of Hungary at the time. And Hitler sent Adolf Eichmann, who within a matter of 3 months managed to ship off over 400,000 Jews to Auschwitz. So luckily, the Jews of Budapest were never systematically deported. But my mother, you see, could not know all this in February 1944. This is the interesting thing. Seen in hindsight, her taking me to the photographer like that seems frivolous, a kind of misplaced bourgeois ritual. She takes her little daughter to be photographed. But then I tell myself that maybe she was hanging on to a feeling of normalcy when everything seemed so chaotic and uncertain around her. So as you can see, photos play a big role in my book, the way they do in so many other books about families and memory. But one of the scariest times in my life, which probably determined many of my later reactions and maybe even my whole character, has no photos to document it. Only a few scattered memories remained, and their chronology was often hazy, or proved to be even downright wrong when I began to look at them closely. The memories themselves, however, were like little bits of film clips, extremely sharp, and in some of them I am running. My mother and I were running down the stairs of our apartment house in early morning and managed to leave the building, even though the concierge has seen us. We tried to walk down the street normally as if we belonged there, but after we turn the corner, we take a mad dash to the next corner, terrified of being followed. Then I am running in the dusty courtyard of the farm where Mother has left me with strangers. It's for my safety, she said, just before she disappeared. And I'm screaming with fear as a gaggle of geese chase after me, honking. The farmer's children laugh at the city girl in her fancy white shoes, afraid of geese. Once I reach the farmhouse, I wipe my tears and promise myself they will never see me cry again. And in a few days, I will be 5 years old. This was a memory that I suppressed for many years. But when I returned to Hungary as an adult with my 2 sons in 1984, I suddenly began to unforget. That's the word I like better than to remember, because it implies a fairly complex process. In my case, it involved allowing childhood memories to surface and wanting to write about them. And these memories came up when I first went back to Budapest. The memories of running were the first things that my mother that I thought of at that point, and that I wrote down. About the farm, I also remember that by the time my mother came to get me a few weeks later, they had decided that we should be together instead of separated. I was playing barefoot with those same kids in the courtyard, and my shoes were gone, and I hardly looked up when she tried to hug me. It took a number of years and quite a few therapy sessions for me to understand that episode of my childhood, when I felt myself so utterly abandoned and alone, had put into place an emotional mechanism that I would often rely on later. When confronted with a devastating loss, grit your teeth and move on. Psychologists call this resilience, the ability of some children to cope with traumatic experiences and become successful adults. Daughter of History is full of resilience, if I could put it that way. After the farm, I was with my parents. We pretended to be Christians. It was scary, always with the danger of making a mistake and being discovered, but I was proud of us, too. Then, when the war was over and we had survived, I was proud of that. Never mind all the other people that had been murdered, that I had heard about, who were much less fortunate. When people ask me about this book, I always say that it's not a Holocaust memoir. And yet, here I've been talking about nothing else. But everything I've mentioned so far occurs in the first 2 chapters of the book. There are 10 more to follow. Although it's not a Holocaust memoir, it's very much about history. History with a capital H, the kind that has a way of totally upending individual lives. I've long been fascinated by this phenomenon, including in my scholarly work. How one day you can be living your life, peaceful and ordinary, and the next day everything has changed because some people that you've never met have made certain decisions that you had nothing to do with. Think of Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine about over a year ago. When I was trying to figure out the best title for this book, a friend who's also here, who had just read my earlier memoir, Budapest Diary, reminded me of something that I had written there. One is not only a child of one's parents, history too nourishes us or deprives us of nourishment. And that was Sonia Bichel, who's sitting here somewhere. So why don't you call it Daughter of History, she said. And I did. In a way, all those who have experienced war or revolution or emigration due to political upheavals are children of history. My family might never have left Hungary if it hadn't been for another war, the Cold War, which brought the Communist Party to power in Eastern Europe. And here's a photo of my parents and me. This is the photo that I thought was the beginning, but it isn't. This is a photo of my parents and me just a few months before we left Budapest in 1949. As you can see, we look fairly prosperous. My mother is wearing the silver pin on her dress, which I still own. She's been to the hairdresser. So we look as if the terrors of 1944 had never existed. Here now this is a photo about 7 years later. This is a picture of me in Chicago on my graduation from high school. I was not even 17. But as you can see, there's quite a difference between the little Hungarian girl with her, well, let's go back to that one. look at the hairdo. You know, I have a funny little thing on the top of my head that little girls wore in Hungary. That's sort of a curl. And now we have, okay, there's Sue Rubin, about to graduate from Senn High School in Chicago. So on her way to Barnard College to an education that would land her some years later at Harvard. Between these two incarnations, there was also a Suzanne, for I attended a French school during the months in Vienna and then again in Port-au-Prince. I knew French way before I knew English. And of course, there was a whole process of becoming American, which took several years. It started even before we arrived in the US, somewhat inauspiciously, I'm afraid. On our way from Vienna to the New World, we stopped, we had a stopover in Munich, and we met a man whom somebody knew, and who I think we spoke Hungarian with him. We sit in the airport cafeteria, and while the grown-ups have coffee, he orders a drink for me that he says I will love. It's bubbly and black and comes in an oddly shaped bottle that the waiter hands me with a straw. I take a sip. It's sweet yet medicinal, foul tasting. I have a hard time not spitting it out. Well, how do you like it? The man asks with a broad smile. I cannot bring myself to reply. You have to get used to it, he says. You'll see, you'll love it. Everybody in America loves Coke. I wonder whether I have failed an important test. Is this a foretaste of what awaits me once we finally reach America? If I have to learn to love this concoction that Americans are crazy about, I will never become a real American. And I have been an American now for close to 7 decades, but I confess I've never learned to love Coke or Pepsi. So by the time of my high school yearbook photo, that and similar early experiences were just past history, of course. But after becoming a perfect American teenager, how did I end up as a globe-trotting professor of French literature? The road back to Europe is another story which I tell in the book, and which I will leave you to discover if you read the book. So what do I hope that readers will take away from Daughter of History? Resilience is good. It allows you to put the past behind you and move forward. Be a success. But like all good things in life, it comes at a price. It may make you wary of intimacy because other people can hurt you or even destroy you. And it may make you forget where you came from, because adapting to new circumstances, surviving and thriving, whatever the cost, is your goal. Writing this book has helped me to reckon with the costs of my resilience. And objects like old photos or the silver pin, which are still with me, or like the red bicycle that I received for my 10th birthday in Budapest, which I had to leave behind forever a few weeks later, have helped me to organize my memories. That's why every chapter in the book has an object as a title: postcard to Ziertz, traveling chess set, green and white Chevrolet, and so on. So to end, I would just like to read just a few pages from the book, if there's time. And wait, is there time? I guess, yes. Just to give you a flavor, because the book has a more literary sort of version of a lot of this stuff. But here, here are a few pages from the prologue. I'm cutting, but Nessa, my 5-year-old granddaughter, who is sitting right here, but now she's 8, has been, she's very happy. Nessa, my 5-year-old granddaughter, has been exploring the wooden box on top of my dresser, in which I keep earrings and a few odd pieces of jewelry. When she finds the silver pin, she turns to me. "Why don't you ever wear this, Ibby? It's pretty." "Pins are for dressing up," I tell her. And in these days of the corona, as she calls it, we don't dress up much. But suddenly I have an idea. Here's a little test for you. A test? Her eyes sparkle. She loves challenges. Pen in hand, we stand in front of the family photos that I have hung in the hallway. Look carefully at the picture of me and my parents. Do you see this pin anywhere? The picture shows the three of us, Lily and Miklos seated close to each other, and me between them. It's high up on the wall. Nessa needs a stepping stool. She climbs up, looks up. She climbs on the stool, looks up, straining to see. Your mom was wearing it, she exclaims triumphantly. Strangely, I don't remember her ever wearing the pin after we came to America. Was this modest relic of post-war Budapest unworthy in her eyes? Or was it associated with a country and a city that she had no desire to remember? She had lost most of her extended family in 1944, deported to Auschwitz with the help of the Hungarian government. Some immigrants retain their ties to the old country. I have known Hungarian Jews who still refer to Budapest as home, decades after they had just barely escaped being shot into the Danube by Hungarian Nazis. My mother had no truck with such nostalgia. She never went back to Budapest, and she reminisced about her youth in that great European capital only if I pushed her hard. The Gellert Baths, I went there often when I was courting, or the Fisherman's Bastion on Castle Hill has beautiful views of the city. Generally, she sought advancement and novelty, not memories. It occurs to me that maybe she did wear the pin in America, and it is I who have blocked it from memory. During my adolescence, I was desperate to be American, just like everyone else, unmarked by signs of difference. Did the pin, which I had found splendid in Budapest, become a reminder of our foreignness? I had adored my mother back there, so beautiful and lively, always willing to play one more game of numbers, what's 4 times 6, what's 5 plus 8, what's 30 minus 7, or read me one more story. But I was often ashamed of her in America. The immigrant mother who never learned to speak English properly and whose insistent voice with its deep vowels in the back of the throat never adapted to measured tones. Now I feel ashamed with a different kind of shame when I think about how little I valued her as an adult. But there is anger there too. If I gradually became incapable of feeling love for her or of expressing love, which in a sense is the same thing, was it not her fault as well as mine? She loved me, I knew, and admired my successes. Although she didn't read my books, she was proud that I had written them. But she was tactless, I tell myself. She didn't know how to listen, was interested only in material things. Yet others loved her. After almost 20 years of widowhood in Miami Beach, she married again, and her new husband doted on her. He was a retired dentist, a widower, a Hungarian Romanian. They got along well, a real couple. When she became ill a few years later, he took care of her. And when she died a few years after that, he mourned her as if they had been together a lifetime. After her death, I kept hearing from people who had known her. She had been the belle of Lincoln Road, one old lady told me. She was fun to be with. She had 1,000 friends. My sister and I often talk about her now. She could be impossible, we say, but she was brave and energetic and had been through a lot. We inherited her photographs and her few pieces of jewelry. The silver pin came to me, along with a delicate gold orchid pin she had acquired in America. I put that one in my jewelry box. The silver pin disappeared into a jumble of old trinkets in a drawer. Devalued, like my mother in America? Yes, but not discarded, waiting. A few years ago, I dug out the pin from the drawer, and after vigorous rubbing with silver polish, managed to get it to shine. I even pinned it on a black jacket before heading out to teach. The gold orchid, when I wear it, reminds me of my mother, but it is simply a pretty object, carrying no strong emotions. The silver pin evokes bruises and ambivalence, emotional knots difficult to untangle. I only wore it once. In 2019, in that far-off time before COVID, I moved to the Washington, D.C. area to be near my younger son and his family after retiring from more than 3 decades of teaching at Harvard University. 6 months later, I, who was often in a plane to somewhere, found myself, like so many others, forced to stay put. My imposed stillness propelled me toward my relics. For religious true believers, relics are sacred remains associated with a saint or a deity. My relics are ordinary objects, but they carry an emotional charge. The silver pin, the old black and white photographs, the miniature chess set that my father bought before we left Hungary. Some are not even material, but exist only in my memory. A fraternity pin I wore for a few months in college. That was my high point of Americanness. A recording of Heifetz playing the Beethoven violin concerto. I cannot expect my relics to help me achieve wholeness, but I can aspire to reconciliation. In accounting, reconciliation is the process of ensuring that two sets of records are in agreement. In human relations, reconciliation is the process of mending a broken relationship. In my history, the records are often missing, and the gaps and blanks can only be filled by imagination, or else must be left open. Is it possible to mend a broken relationship with a person who is no longer there to participate in the process? Can one mend a broken relationship to time and space, to home? How many cities have I called home? No straight lines, but zigzags, breaks, departures, returns. What is the opposite of broken? Intact, unbroken. Unbreaking, the process by which the broken is mended with the cracks still showing. So that was the end of this story. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Susan. So many of the countries in Europe, or few countries in Europe in addition to Germany, developed something called stumble stones, which were placed in the ground at the site of a formerly Jewish residence. I'm wondering, when you went back with your sons and you returned to your home, whether there was a stumble stone there.
Hungary doesn't. These stumble stones are very prevalent in Germany. Actually,
Yeah.
you see a lot of them, but I haven't seen any in France. In France, there are plaques on the sides of buildings, but not. Sometimes they say this was a school from which 15 or 30 Jewish children were deported, or else they'll say this was a place where a soldier fell during the liberation of Paris. But they're plaques. But there aren't any, and there are occasionally plaques. The building where I lived, where I've gone back often, in the Jewish neighborhood of Budapest, now has a little plaque, but not about me or about the Jews. It's about somebody who lived there during, who was a famous person during the war. But yeah, no stumble stones in Hungary at the moment. Yeah.
I'm wondering what happened with your parents, what they did during the war. If your house was taken by the neighbor, like my parents, when they came after the war from the labor camp, neighbor took the house and didn't allow them to live there. Is your parents live in a ghetto or not, and how they survive? And also, if you know about Kastner, what happened exactly with Kastner that people killed him?
Well, okay, two questions. One question, I tell the story of I was a little girl, I was like 5 years old in the summer of 1944, in the fall of 1944, when we went into hiding because my father had obtained false papers, and so we were pretending to be Christians. I was a little girl named Mary. That was part of my resilience, I was really good at pretending to be Mary. I even learned how to sing "O Holy Night," Christmas 1944. Because we were with other people in a house. I was the only kid, so I had to sing "O Holy Night." My mother taught me that. So there, and we were not in the ghetto. The Budapest ghetto was established very late in the war, in November 1944. Too late to deport people by then. So that's and maybe we came back to our apartment in a apartment building in Budapest. it was there. It was full of dust and the windows were broken, but it was there. So that's one question. The other question is a more historical question about a man named Rudolf Kastner, who was part of the sort of Jewish establishment, if you will, or administration in Hungary. He was from what is now Cluj in Romania. But Kastner made a deal with the Germans who were in Hungary, with not Eichmann exactly, but people under Eichmann, that in return for payment of a certain sum, they would allow something like 1,500 Jews to leave Budapest. Now, the question that was terrible, I think, for Kastner was, who do I put on the train? Who deserves to leave, to live, as it were? And Kastner's train left Budapest sometime in the June or May. I don't have all the facts right at my fingertips, but in 1944, and he put his own family from Cluj on the train, obviously. Then he also put a bunch of very wealthy industrialists on the train, but he also put something like 40 or 50 orphans. So he tried, I think, to do what he could and decide, well, okay, but obviously it's a horrible choice to have to make. And so anyway, the train left, and the people who went on that train were taken to Bergen-Belsen first, but they all ended up okay. They ended up in Italy or other places. They survived. So the Kastner people survived. Kastner himself went to Israel and was murdered in Israel some years later by not exactly clear what the guy was thinking who murdered him. He thought he was taking vengeance because they said, well, the accusation was Kastner had collaborated with the Nazis. Well, to some extent, I guess he did collaborate in the sense that he talked to them and they paid the money and he got the train out. Now, Kastner had a bad rep in Israel for a long time, but as of a few years ago, his name has become more. There have been some documentaries and books, and his name. People have tried to understand a little bit more about what he was trying to do. Okay.
No, I've asked.
Hi. I have a question about religion. If your family returned to Judaism after the war, and how what your beliefs are about God.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess this is a tell-all memoir, right? We certainly did. I talk about that quite a bit. My father came from a Polish Jewish family in Galicia, which was it was part of the Habsburg Empire before World War I, and then became Poland. So he came from a Orthodox Jewish family. They were Kohanim on both sides. Both his mother and his father were high priests, descendants from Aaron. They were very religious. He was very religious. He was trained as a yeshiva, in a yeshiva. He was an Orthodox. He had the diploma of an Orthodox rabbi, although he never really had like a congregation. He worked for the Orthodox Community Bureau of Budapest. So there's no question of my family not returning, as you put it, to Judaism. Of course we did. Right, that was. I myself went to a school of nuns in Port-au-Prince and was tempted for a short while by all the beautiful pictures of saints and by the goodness of the nuns, who were just marvelous teachers and really good people. And I talk about that in the book a little bit. My temptation, which I eventually rejected. I am very Jewish. I'm totally identified as Jewish, but I also think of myself as sometimes a non-Jewish, not a non-Jewish Jew. That was an expression that. Can't remember his name suddenly, but a well-known Jewish scholar came up with, Freud and others being examples of non-Jewish Jews. But I'm sort of a godless Jew. I mean, I have to confess, I do not much believe in a personal deity. But it doesn't mean that I don't go to, synagogue. I do. I just don't really believe that there is somebody up there. Sorry to say this, but that's. But I feel identified with Jews and Judaism as a cultural tradition, as a history, as a practice, if you will. Both of my sons, one of whom is sitting right here, had bar mitzvahs, I'm part of the community, if you will. But I think it's a long tradition among Jews not to believe in God. So, right, it's okay. You can be a Jew who doesn't believe in God.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your story kind of resonates because it's so similar to my mother's and my father's, both of whom are Hungarian. My mom was rescued by Raoul Wallenberg, and my dad was in Auschwitz. But two things that you said kind of stuck with me. My mom told me on a recent trip we went to Frolic in Mexico with another Holocaust survivor from Hungary, but she said, after what happened, I could never cry again. So it kind of resonates with your resilience, and I'm wondering if you were able to cry again, or was it something that has stuck with you throughout your life? And then the second question, my parents always had a hard time reconciling their Hungarian upbringing with them being Canadian. They both immigrated to Canada. But have you been able to do that? And do you see yourself more as American or more as Hungarian?
Good question. I think it makes a huge difference at what age one arrives in a new country. I was really very young. I was 11 when we arrived in New York City. So I learned English very quickly, and school was my savior throughout my life. School was the thing, everything else around me could be breaking up into chaos, but school was good. So I really, succeeded in that. Do I feel, well, that's one of the questions in the book. Am I American? I'm not Hungarian. I don't even think of myself as a Hungarian American. I don't know what that means exactly, but I think what I finally end up with in the book is the notion that once you sort of acquire the American identity, as in a passport, a citizenship, then you can start to think about making round trips. That was one of the ways that I reestablished my contact to Europe. I didn't go back to Europe to live, but I've taken many dozens of round trips to Europe. And that's the beauty of course, having the security of the American passport allows you to make the round trips, and also allows you to experiment with more than one identity. I mean, we don't have to be just one thing. That's what I finally conclude in the book, is you can be more than one thing at any given time, and it's okay. So, am I fully, totally, 100% American? How many of us can say that we are? I guess some of us are, but feel that way. But most of us have a little mixture in our sense of who we are, and I think that's how I feel. Did I answer both of your questions? I can't remember what else. What was the other one?
The ability to cry.
Oh, crying. That's one of the costs of resilience. You end up. I have cried on occasion, and cried a lot. But I was trying to suggest that is one of the things that you learn. You learn to sort of not express your deepest sorrows in the most obvious way. Oh, I cry when I go to a film and it's sad, of course. But I mean, like, cry as in you have hurt me, and I'm crying. I haven't done that all that much. So yeah, it's one of the traces of of my immigrant girlhood. Yeah. Oh, do you have a question for me?
Yes.
This is my
So-
grandson Alexander, who is
Amy.
10 years old.
So, when you said that you didn't like Coke, do you still not like it? Or is it like, or was it just like for that time you didn't like it and now it's grown on you? Because it grown on me.
Oh, it has grown on you. Hey.
I mean, I never not liked it.
Oh.
What about you?
Well, you are a true American, my darling Alexander. Right. I think I have been known to drink a Diet Coke if there's nothing else available, with a lot of ice, however, and lemon if possible.
Did
But
you drink
it's
it?
It's not my go-to drink, shall we say?
Did you drink it with ice the first time?
I can't remember, darling. I think maybe not. Maybe it just came in a bottle, with a straw.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can't beat that. You're obviously a linguist. I mean, you're a French professor. Do you can you still speak Hungarian?
I can indeed.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. I do. I don't write it very well, but I read it pretty well, and I speak it quite well.
Obviously, without an accent.
Well, a little accent. Usually, people tell me is we know you were born here, but you haven't been here in a while.
And how did you end up as a French? I mean, how did you decide that that's what you wanted to do in school, to become a French professor, a professor of French?
Read my book? No, I'm just.
No, seriously.
No, well.
I mean, history
French was
would have been
French was my passport to return to Europe. In other words, people have asked me that, hey, wait a minute, you wanted to be an American, so when you went to Barnard, why the heck didn't you end up as an English major? That would have been obvious. Then I would have read Milton's Paradise Lost. So why French? I mean, French was the intermediate language between my native language, Hungarian, and English. I speak French much better than I speak Hungarian. I can write French totally like English.
Of course.
And so I think France was the, and when I first went back to Europe after college, France was the place. I spent a year in Paris. That's how I became a French professor. So I think France plays an interesting role here as a sort of a a mediator between Hungary and the United States.
and Europe and America.
And Europe and America, exactly.
Thank you.
Oh, another question from NASA. All right.
Do you ever speak French in like normal conversations?
Yes, my darling, I speak it with all my French friends, and I have a lot of French friends. Yes, normal conversation, and also in normal writing, emails and whatever. Indeed, I do.
Thank you.
Good for Nessa, yeah.
Very cute. My closest childhood.
Could you,
Certainly. Is that better? My closest childhood friend, who I grew up across the street from her, is Hungarian. Her family came over. I'm from Detroit, and came to Detroit just shortly before she was born. And so I grew up having palanchita.
eating palacinta?
Palacinta.
Yeah, palacinta, which are the crepes, Hungarian
Right,
crepes. Yeah.
right. And long story short, but this the story about my mother. So the grandmother made palanchita without a recipe, and so
Of course.
So my mother stood next to her and grabbed each hand as she grabbed flour and to put it in a measuring cup so that my mother could actually get a recipe. So I have that.
Oh,
Which
good
is-
for you.
which is
I don't
great.
know how to make palacinta.
I'll share the recipe.
Oh, good. I can make chicken paprikash, however.
So I grew up eating, I was always back and forth at their house, so I grew up eating all of that. So my question for you is, they had a really, really strong identity, being Hungarian. And I'm just wondering, I think I mean, it seemed like it was a lot stronger than other, people coming from other countries. Is that your experience? And then could you speak to that?
Interesting. But do Hungarians? Your question is, do Hungarian immigrants retain their Hungarianness more than other? I wouldn't hazard to say. I don't know. Are Romanians, after all, aren't they as attached to Romania as, or Poles? There are lots of Polish associations, I guess there could also be a question about Jewish Hungarians. Now, that's an interesting question. I mean, why is it that, as I said, there are so many Jews who say, I'm going home. They mean Budapest. They hadn't been there, like they were kids or something, and their families could have been shot into the Danube, but they weren't. So why do they say home? What, home? Home to Budapest? I think that there is a history of Jewish love of Hungary, which is very similar to the way that Jews in Germany, for example, felt about Germany, or France, for that matter. A real love of the country that a kind of patriotism. In Hungary, I think it had to do also with the fact that Hungary was a country that hadn't won a war in hundreds of years. It was always feeling itself to be slightly, a victim. And the Jews loved Hungary. I mean, the Jews contributed greatly to Hungarian literature and music, and so they really were part of Hungarian culture from the late 19th century until the Holocaust, pretty much. Just similar to what you see, as I said, in Germany and in France. Now, it's a tragedy of European history that kind of attachment on the part of Jews to these countries where they felt at home, where they felt it really was their home at the time, that they had to realize that although they loved Hungary, Hungary didn't love them, as it were. So this is the tragedy of Jewish existence.
Right.
Anyway.
So I'm going to get your book for my friend, and if you'd like, I will be happy to share the poetry recipe
Good.
with you.
Thank you. I don't know.
You want to ask a question? Yes.
Okay. Are we done?
Oh, you know.
No, we're gonna go right here.
Okay.
One more question?
Oh, I hate to be the last one. I was curious about why your parents left in '49. There were a lot of people left in '56 for obvious reasons, and a lot of, as you probably know, there was this sort of influx at Barnard, which my wife graduated from. You might have been in the same class, by the way. What year did you graduate, by the way?
Pardon me? When did I graduate?
From Barnard.
Well, 1960.
Oh, she graduated in '58. Anyway, I was curious why they left in '49.
In 49?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of part of it had to do with the creation of the State of Israel in 48. A number of Jews left Budapest when they had the opportunity to go to Israel. Now, my family did not want to go to Israel, despite my father's deep orthodoxy, because for one thing, we had relatives. My mother had a younger brother, the famous Oncle d'Amérique, the American uncle. It was my American uncle. It was her younger brother who had left Europe way back in the 30s as a kid. And he was the one that, he first got his mother, my grandmother, who had survived the war. He got her out, and my uncle sent tickets. They left. And then, so, it was just my family after my grandmother left. Things also became very harsh in the communist regime between 48 and 49 really cracked down. That's when Rákosi, who became the dictator for about 5 years, he really, it was Stalinist Hungary, okay? But 49 was pretty much the last minute you could leave. It was already illegal. You could not leave legally. My grandmother left on a train with papers and tickets in 48. We left by walking across the border into Czechoslovakia because, but the border was not yet mined. very soon after we left, in 1949, they put mine fields along the border, so then you could no longer leave, and that's why emigration illegal stopped from Hungary until '56. So that's the story. Okay.
Let me share one thing about what the question about you speaking French. So in the Annie Arnaud class, Susan was translating instantaneously from the text, which is remarkable, which is an incredible skill. So I can attest to
Correcting
French
the translation.
and correcting the translation. Wow. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone.